moment to thank. Thank you.
I hit it. I just hit it. Sorry.
Thank you. No, thank you so much.
Got you.
I already forgot. But just wanted to take a moment to thank Peninsula Open Space Trust for co-hosting this event with us. POST's mission is to protect open space on the peninsula and in the South Bay for the benefit of all. A lot of our programming takes place on post protected land, so we are very grateful for them and their mission. And of course, we want to thank Erin Cord from Bat Conservation International for providing our community with this amazing opportunity to learn about the bats that live in our area. And I will go ahead and pass it to you to tell us a little bit more about your organization and the wonderful world of bats.
Okay, thank you so much, Alexis. Thank you, Saved by Nature. Thank you, Post. I'm really glad to be here. Get to talk about my favorite topic in the world. So I appreciate that y'all want to listen. I will say, so I am based out of Austin, Texas. I don't know if any of you have been there, but we have the iconic Bat Bridge downtown, which is where I am right now. Not really, but I'm pretending. But that's what the picture is behind me. So yeah, my name is Erin Cord. I am the Community Engagement Manager for Bat Conservation International, and I am going to talk to you all today about bats. There we go. So really quickly, if you're not familiar with us, Bat Conservation International has been around for 40 years now, which is really exciting. Our mission is very, very simple. We just want to end bat extinctions worldwide. And we have a lot of different strategies kind of working towards that goal. And we really are an international organization. Most of our staff lives in the US. We do have some staff in Mexico and Canada, but we work all over the world with all different partners in different countries, trying to kind of identify bats that are, in critical need of help, or those that are endangered or threatened, and work it with our conservation team and our science team to try to figure out how we can protect and keep these bats from going extinct, basically. So we really want to think about conservation, science. We do a lot of research. We want to make sure it's applied research that we can actually use to help bats. And then we also want to include people in this too, because we recognize that, meaningful, long-lasting conservation work doesn't happen unless you include people in that as well. We're all kind of part of this world in the equation, and we really want that to be part of what we do. So that's a lot of what my job is as a community engagement manager, which I love. So yeah, with that, that's BCI. I'll have our website at the end of this presentation if you want to check us out. And then I think if you have questions during the presentation, just type them in the chat, and then we'll have some time to answer them at the end. We'll also have time for y'all to just raise your hands and ask questions too. That works at the end. So bats, what do we think of when we think of bats? So actually, it's funny, when I put this together, I realized most of these are pretty old. But I think still this is true, where a lot of times when bats are depicted in media, on TV, in movies, they're really shown kind of associated with things that are scary, things that are evil, like vampires, things like that. It's still very much a thing. I just saw the Mario Brothers movie with my son on Friday, and there was evil bats in that. And I get so mad now when I annoy everyone that knows me, because I'm just like, the bats were depicted poorly in that movie. And they're like, Erin, get over it. But yeah, I think bats kind of get a bad rap. And, there's a lot of different reasons for this. I do think public perception of bats is kind of, much more positive now than it was when BCI started in the 80s. We really were trying to kind of change hearts and minds about bats in general. And I think now we're still doing that, but we're kind of beyond that in terms of just like focusing mostly on conservation now, because it seems like most people are at least recognize that bats are important, which is great. And that's really what we're going for. But, there's still a lot of misinformation about bats, a lot of fear-based information, I'd say. So I like to kind of cover some of the common bat myths that maybe you've heard and tell you why they're not true. And then you guys can all be bat experts from after this presentation. So the first one is that bats are blind. Blind as a bat is a pretty common expression. My grandma used to say it all the time. But bats can actually see as well as we can, and they hunt at night. So think about how well people would do hunting at night. We would have a really hard time. But bats are amazing because not only can they see about as well as we can, they actually use echolocation or sound to find their prey at night. So I'll talk more about that in a second, but bats are definitely not blind, and they actually kind of have this amazing superpower of echolocation. The next one is that bats are rodents with wings or rats with wings. This idea that sort of they're like pest species. I think if you think about rats and mice and rodents, they have a lot of babies. They reproduce very quickly, large litters. If you have one rat in your shed, chances are you've got probably a lot more than that. But with bats, they actually only give birth to one pup a year. So they reproduce really, really slowly, which is a big difference. Also, bats are actually not that genetically closely related to rodents. They're in their own order of mammals called Chiroptera, which I'll tell you what that means in a second. But they did some DNA analysis and found that bats are actually more closely related to horses genetically than rodents, which is kind of like blows my mind. But there's a paper out there. I'm happy to share that paper if you want to email me, but it is true. So yeah, they're actually not that closely related to rodents at all. The other one kind of going along with bats are pests is this idea that, bats have rabies or the bats carry disease, more often than other species. And, rabies particularly is very scary. If you don't catch it early enough, it is 100% fatal. So, most bats do not have rabies. Less than 1% of wild bats actually carry rabies or have rabies. So it's pretty uncommon. The issue with bats is that usually we don't interact with them. They're out at night, they take the night shift, we're asleep. So people don't really kind of come in contact with bats, and if they do, it's a bat that's like on the ground, they see it during the day, potentially a sick bat. So there's sort of a sampling bias where, if people do encounter bats, they may be sick, and that's just because of the nature of how bats are. So bats don't have rabies more than any other mammal, but with any wildlife, you want to be really careful. You want to wear gloves if you're going to pick them up. You want to tell kids not to handle wildlife and all. And, you can always figure out who your wildlife rehabilitator is in the area and just give them a call and they will walk you through the process if you did find a bat during the day. But yeah, so bats are not pests and they don't really carry diseases more than other things. The other one I like to, I think this one is sort of old school. When I do this talk for I just did it for a senior center and they were like, oh yeah, bats will get in your hair. And then when I talk to kids, last week I talked to kids in college and they had no idea what I was talking about. So I think this myth is sort of going kind of an old school myth, but this idea that bats want to roost in your hair or will get in your hair or want to be anywhere near your hair, not true at all. Bats do not roost in hair. They roost, in trees, they roost in caves, they roost on bridges, lots of places, none of them are hair. And actually their echolocation abilities are so good that they can echolocate something, they can sense something as thin as one piece of human hair, which is what I'm holding up now, though it's hard to tell on my camera. But yeah, so they're not interested in our heads. They're not interested in our hair at all. And then the last one is, vampire bats, or all bats are vampires, or bats suck blood. We all know this comes from Dracula and all those kind of, movies and things like that. So there are over 1,400 species of bats that have been identified in the world, which is a lot. That's about 1/3 of all mammals are actually bats. Out of those 1,400 plus, only 3 of them actually feed on blood. And of those 3, only 1 feeds on the blood of mammals and is what we would consider an actual vampire bat. The other 2 feed on blood of birds. So 1 out of 1,400 species of bats is actually what we would consider a vampire bat. They live in Latin America, South America, and the tropics. We do not have them here in the United States. Most of the bats we have here in the US and all the bats you have in your area in California, they eat bugs. They're not interested in us at all. They're not interested in our blood. They are interested in bugs. They love bugs. So vampire bats are actually pretty, out of all the bats, they're not that common. They're common in kind of places where they're found, but 1 out of 1,400 species, there's really not that many that kind of follow that path. So just gives you a sense of kind of, how overblown this idea is of bats drinking blood and that kind of thing. So those are the 5 bat myths that you will often hear. And now you know why they're not true. So now for some serious stuff. Bats really need our help now more than ever. It's estimated that about 1 in 3 or 30% of the bats in the United States are at risk. This means they're either listed by Fish and Wildlife as endangered or threatened, or they sort of have a declining population. So that is quite a bit, and that number is going up. And then in the world, actually, about 80% of the world's bats need conservation help, or we need more information where it's data deficient, we don't know what's going on. So because of the way bats are, because, they're cryptic, they hide, they blend in, you have to kind of find where their roosts are, they're out at night. Sometimes they're really hard to study and track. So, we're always trying to get more information, but we're realizing that a lot of bat species are, in danger of kind of having a declining population. And so, as I said, bats are mammals, just like us. And so we should kind of feel some affinity towards them, I think, anyway. And you'll see here, the bones of our arms and hands are the same, are analogous to the bones of bats. And bats, their wings are just elongated fingers with skin stretched between them. So this is their thumb here. And that's great. It makes sense because they're from the order Chiroptera, which literally in Latin means hand wing. So you can see it here, like this is their little thumb, and then these are their very long fingers. So when bats are flying, it's kind of like they're doing jazz hands, is what I always like to say. Kind of imagine that. And, there's over 1,400, so they're very diverse. So the biggest bat in the world is this giant golden crown flying fox. These guys are found, I think, mostly in Malaysia. So not this part of the world at all. We don't have any flying foxes here. Unfortunately, I think they're very cute, but they're big. And so this one actually has a 6-foot wingspan. It is a very, very large bat. They eat fruit. They hang out in trees. They're quite docile, not aggressive at all. But that is the biggest bat in the world. And then on the other side of that, the smallest bat in the world is the bumblebee bat. They have a 3-inch wingspan, and they're super, super tiny. So that just gives you a sense of kind of the range of diversity of bats that there are in the world. Kind of amazing. These guys are also found in Asia too. We don't have them here. So I mentioned echolocation, which is a pretty amazing thing. It's basically bats are screaming all the time, if you think about it, because they're throwing out sound to find their way around. So as they're yelling, the sound is going out, and then it bounces off the prey item here, and they're able to use that method to kind of dial in, getting closer and closer to what they're looking for. So they actually do this in the air as they're catching insects, which is really, really impressive. And it takes a lot of kind of skill and work. But, because they're screaming all the time, you kind of think, well, why can't we hear that? And it's because, luckily for us, their sound is at a higher frequency than our ears pick up, which is good because, if you're near a bat colony, I think it would be quite loud. But also, if you were yelling all the time, you might think, well, how do you do that without kind of going deaf yourself just because from yelling? And actually, bats have this really cool adaptation where when they open their mouths to make a sound, they have an ear bone that quickly, just really fast, dislocates so they can't hear it. And when they close their mouth again, it relocates and they can hear the sound coming back from them. So it's a really interesting adaptation that they've developed. So I have some movies. Hopefully no one here is a huge spider fan. Because this spider is not going to make it. You'll see the bat come in. He kind of changes courses because he's echolocating this whole time. And he grabs that spider, scoops it up with his tail. So I'll play that one more time. So yeah, they're kind of always echolocating, just using it to get around and then also to find prey too. And they use their tails as a scoop. And so Alexa, can you hear this noise? Okay, all right, never mind. Basically, with this video, you're just seeing this is a moth right here. The bat's echolocating, and then he scoops in, and they do this aerial acrobatics, basically, where they're kind of scooping it up with their tail. They eat it on the wing, and then they go on and find the next one. So I want to talk really fast about why bats are important. And what you just saw is a great reason. Bats are really important for pest control. Now, I know nobody probably likes mosquitoes, and bats definitely do eat mosquitoes. They eat a lot of mosquitoes, but they also eat a lot of what we would consider crop pests. So they save the agricultural industry in the United States billions of dollars every year by eating the pests that would kind of destroy crops otherwise. And this goes for your garden as well. So, the things that you might have on your kale, on your cauliflower, those little grubs, little caterpillars, a lot of them grew up to be delicious bat food in the form of moths. So, bats are great for natural pests. So you don't have to use pesticide if you have bats around, which is great, and they save our industry a lot of money by doing that. And like I said, most of the bats we have in the US eat bugs. So they're doing this every day. A pregnant bat can eat her weight in body weight in insects every single night. which is kind of amazing. And they eat so many bugs if you're talking about a colony of bats, which is really great. Another reason bats are important is they are pollinators. This is something people sometimes don't realize. And, we do have some pollinating bats in the United States. They're mostly in the desert Southwest. There are some in Southern California, which is pretty cool. And one thing that people love to know is they are one of the most important pollinators of agave. So if you like tequila, if you like margaritas, you can thank a bat for that. There's actually a whole bat-friendly tequila movement that's happening mainly in Mexico. You can go to batfriendly.org, and they're working with agave growers to basically leave some of the flowers and stalks to flower, because a lot of times they'll cut the stalks off the agave before they flower because there's more sugar in the plant and then the leaves that way. But that's not good for the bats. So talking to growers and having them leave, some to flower and kind of have that nectar available for bats. They can make agave out of some of the others, and it's a really nice way to have bat-friendly tequila, which is great. But besides agave, they pollinate over 500 different species of plants, and some of those are the wild types of a lot of the fruits that we enjoy. So bats are pollinators of mangoes, of guava, bananas too, which are great. And then I have a video, another one. So this is in a lab. Just pretend this is a flower, and this is the nectar down here. And you'll see the bat coming up. This is a nectar feeding bat. And he's going to stick his tongue in right here. And they slurp up the nectar just like a little straw. There he goes. And you'll see how far he is in there. So they're really efficient pollinators. They get covered in pollen when they pollinate. And so, they're really great at transferring that pollen from plant to plant, and they do a really good job of it. I'll play this one more time because it's super cute. A lot of the pollinating bats too have this little kind of projection on their nose. It's like a leaf nose, and it's very adorable, I think, anyway. I might be biased, but there you go, drinking that nectar. So the other reason the bats are important is for seed dispersal. So we have a lot of fruit-eating bats in the world. We don't have any fruit-eating bats in the United States. They're mostly kind of in tropical areas, but they eat a lot of fruit. And when they're eating the fruit, they eat the seeds as well. The seeds pass through their system and come out in what we call guano, which is a fancy word for bat poop. And so in areas of the rainforest like this that have been clear cut, most wildlife's not going to cross this. It's very exposed, it's open, they feel quite vulnerable. But fruit bats will fly across this no problem at night, and they will drop guano on their way. And actually that guano is such good fertilizer that the seeds inside the guano are really successful at growing. So I think it's about 95% of new growth in these clear-cut areas is due to fruit bats. So they're so important for forest regeneration in the rainforest particularly, which is pretty awesome. And so now talking about some threats to bats, what's the reason why, 1/3 of our bats in the US are in trouble? Well, there's a couple different reasons, but one of the main ones is a pathogen known as white nose syndrome. Now, white nose syndrome is kind of an interesting thing. It's a fungus that the bats will get on their skin. It actually makes their noses kind of look white like that. That's where the name comes from. But they develop a disease from the fungus where they get lesions kind of all over their skin and their wings. And it's for bats that are hibernating where it's really an issue because they're so uncomfortable and they can't kind of keep warm that they wake up during hibernation. Every time they wake up during hibernation, they use about a month's worth of food storage. So they end up starving to death because of white nose syndrome. And white nose syndrome is interesting because you'll see in this map, this is kind of a lot to look at, but basically white nose started in New York. And they think that someone actually went into a cave in New York at some point, came from Europe, because the fungus does exist over in Europe, but it's not an issue to the bats there. They think they hadn't cleaned their gear, accidentally brought the fungus over to the US in 2006. And then they started noticing bats with these white noses and lots of dead bats in these areas. And again, it's the hibernating bats. So it's only certain species that are really impacted, but you can see it's very contagious and bats will carry it, and bats switch roosts all the time, they interact with each other. And so every year it's just kind of slowly moved across the country. In Texas, where I am, we had our first white nose confirmed death in 2020. So it's just gotten here. It's been here for about a couple years. And in California, you'll see these spaces mean that they think the fungus is there, but they have not confirmed it yet. So there hasn't actually been, as far as I know, any white-nosed deaths in California, but it seems like it's kind of a matter of time because it's just so hard to stop the spread. And if you're interested in this, want to learn more, this website, whitenosesyndrome.org, is really informative. And this is like, okay, well, what can we do to help this? And it's really complicated. With people, we always say, clean your gear. If you're going into a cave, you want to clean your gear between caves, if that's something that you do. We have a whole research team that is focusing on white nose syndrome, and they're looking for a lot of different ways to kind of help these bats. One thing we have is this project called the Fat Bat Project, where we found that bats that are actually, heavier and have more body mass can possibly survive through the winter with white nose. So we're kind of creating these feeding stations near bat hibernacula, which just means bat roosts, so caves. Just creating these feeding stations where we're trying to attract a lot of insects to kind of fatten the bats up before they hibernate. We had our first year of that pilot last year. And so hopefully we'll get some good results from that. And we can maybe kind of keep doing that and kind of expand the program and scale it up, but we'll see. So it's kind of an ever-evolving issue, and it's really complicated, but it's had a huge impact on bats since 2006. So besides white nose syndrome, there's some other issues too. Wind energy is actually very complicated because, we all love green energy, and wind energy is clean in a lot of ways, but there are certain species of bats that are really attracted to the wind turbines, and we're not exactly sure why. There's a lot of different hypotheses out there, but no one's quite figured exactly why they're attracted. I mean, bats are kind of curious by nature, so it could be something like that. There could be a sound that the wind turbines are making that is interesting to the bats. They have a lot of different ways that we're trying to kind of mitigate the loss from wind turbine strikes with bats. Sometimes it seems like a lot of the bat deaths from wind turbines happen at low wind speeds. So, talking to the wind energy companies about turning their blades off when the wind is low. Or some people are trying to install kind of these devices that make a lot of sounds that hopefully will kind of make the bat not want to be around the wind turbine. So there's a lot of different things we have going on with wind energy right now, where we're trying to work with wind companies to figure out what's going on and to really kind of help these bats, because certain species, mostly our kind of long distance migrating bats, have really been kind of decimated in certain areas from wind turbines specifically. And then besides those two, sorry, I know this is like the sad part of the presentation. I promise more cute bat pictures in a minute. Climate change is obviously a huge issue. I mean, I know in California, you guys have had crazy weather, and we have in Texas too. It's just, extreme after extreme, which is really hard for wildlife to deal with. And, there's issues like too much water, not enough water, maybe, some insects that they were counting on being available, they come out super early one year, and then they're not available for when the bats are when the bats are having babies. So there's just so many different things that climate change impacts that it's really hard to kind of figure it all out, but we know it's a major issue, obviously. And then kind of along with that is habitat loss. Development. The United States is continues to be rapidly developed. We're losing green space, we're losing forests, and, it's kind of one of those things that keeps happening, and something that, we're always trying to kind of restore and protect habitat too. Okay, fun stuff. Okay, now for the bats of San Jose. I'm not going to talk about all of them, but I just wanted you to meet some of your bat neighbors. You guys have like 16 species in your area, which is actually really impressive. That's awesome. So in California, because white nose is not as much of an issue yet, these are sort of the main threats that we've got to bats right now. Just so you know, you probably could have guessed all these. But I want you to meet your bat neighbors. So this is a hoary bat. They are named hoary bats because they have kind of these white tips on their hair, which is supposed to resemble hoarfrost, which is what it looks like when it freezes like this. So that's where they get their name. These guys are actually solitary tree roosting bats. So I know we think of bats all the time, so we think about them living in caves, living in them in large groups, but some bats pretty much live alone. They'll get together to mate, and then they kind of go their separate ways. So, a female hoary bat will have babies and kind of take care of them on her own. And she's, they'll be in a tree, they'll be curled up. They try to blend in, look like a dead leaf. You might have a bat in your yard right now and never know it. So some of our solitary bats are really common, just not commonly seen. So we're here, a hoary bat is one of those. These guys are really long distance migrators, so they have been really impacted by wind turbines. I think they found that hoary bats have lost about 80% of their population, mainly from wind energy, which is pretty sad and something that we're definitely working on trying to fix, but they are very cute, and they're actually one of the biggest bats that we have in the United States. And I've heard they're quite feisty if you catch them in a net, which I have not had the privilege of. I hear hoary bats are very, very feisty and they try to bite you, which, they're mad. They don't want to be handled. I get it. The next one is the Mexican freetail or a Brazilian freetail. You can hear them, depends on where you are in the country. People will use one name or the other, but it's the same bat, I promise you. I looked up online, and at Yolo Basin, there is a colony of Mexican free-tailed bats in California, which I think is near you guys, which is cool. Their genus Tadarida actually means wrinkly lips. You can see they kind of have these wrinkly little lips. It's kind of cute. These have the giant colonies. So the colony in downtown Austin under our bridge behind me, that is a huge maternity colony of Mexican free-tailed bats. We have a property called Bracken Cave in Texas. It's actually the largest bat colony in the world. It's all a maternity colony of Mexican free-tailed bats. It's about 20 million in the summer, which is just an insane number to watch come out in this like giant bat tornado. So if you're ever visiting San Antonio or Austin, check out Bracken Cave. It's really worth a visit in the summer. So these guys like to roost together, safety in numbers and all that sort of thing. And they're actually experiencing sort of a range expansion. We think mainly because of climate change, because things are kind of warmer farther north now. They actually found them in Baltimore a couple years ago, which was sort of a surprise. And I think they're kind of moving north, which is interesting. The next is the Townsend's big-eared bat. These guys are super cute. And actually, when they're roosting and asleep, they'll kind of curl their ears back, and it looks like they have kind of ram horns, which is pretty funny to see on a bat. Their large ears, they think, help them kind of be better at picking up sound when they're hunting, but they think it also might help them kind of disperse some of their heat too, and kind of help keep them cool. Trying to kind of figure that out. There's a colony of Townsend's big-eared bats at Pinnacles in your area at Bear Gulch Cave. I'm not sure how easy it is to see the colony. I actually haven't been there myself, but there is a colony of Townsend's big-eared bats, and they're pretty common in California, especially in like abandoned mines, areas like that. There's a lot of Townsends around, and they all kind of roost together with their little ears curled back, and it's very, very cute. Another one is the Western red bat, and these are really pretty looking bats. They have this kind of beautiful fur. The males especially are just kind of this beautiful orange color. This is another species of solitary tree roosting bat. So this is another one that, you could have in your yard and not realize it, because they really do kind of roll up and look like a dead leaf, and you would never notice them. These are interesting because the females, most bats, as I said, have one pup per year. These females can actually have up to 4. Which is nuts for a bat. That's so many babies to take care of. And they, for some reason, just this species, the Western and the Eastern red bats, have a lot of kids, and the females just raise them all on their own, which is a lot of work. But that's kind of something interesting about them. And then the last one is the Yuma myotis. These guys are pretty small. They're fairly common in California and in the West Coast, especially. They're really usually forage around slow-moving water, and they tend to kind of roost around slow-moving water as well. Sometimes they'll roost in man-made structures, sometimes in natural habitats. But if you see a bunch of bats kind of foraging right around dusk in kind of slower-moving water, there's a good chance it's a Yuma myotis group. And these guys are really small. They're not big at all. They're tiny little bats. Okay, so now you love bats. You've met some of your neighbors. So we like to talk about how people can help bats in their own yard. As I mentioned, habitat loss is a huge issue, and you can actually create bat habitat in your yard, in your park, and you're in kind of open spaces. So we just think about like what bats need. They need food. Well, most of the bats in your area eat insects, or sorry, all of the bats in your area eat insects. They need a place to sleep, a place to raise their young, so roosting habitat, and then they need water, because everything needs water. So we've talked a lot about in our organization, we talk a lot about bat gardening. It's kind of a new program we're sort of putting forward. And it's basically this idea of planting native plants to support the insects that bats eat. And really, when we say that, we just mean nighttime pollinators. So it's very much a pollinator garden. It's just thinking about things like moths and flies and beetles and things that come out at night. So a lot of the plants that support butterflies and bees during the day are going to support some of the stuff that comes out at night too. So there's a lot of overlap. If you have a pollinator garden, some of those plants are probably really great for bat food also already. So yeah, we just think about things that attract nighttime pollinators, like things that keep their flowers open at night. Host plants for moths. You can get really into the weeds about that. Moths have some really interesting caterpillars, and they're kind of fun to raise too. It's kind of, I raise a lot of caterpillars with my son just to kind of see what things are going to turn out to be. Very fun to do. And then, as I said before, garden plants, if you have kale, if you have cauliflower, and you can keep it pesticide free, those are great. Bats will come and, maybe not come to your yard, but, once things fly away, it's great bat food. So these are kind of all things you can kind of think about with bat gardening. So that's the food. And then we do have a guide to gardening for bats, which I'm excited to announce. We have published this now. It's on our website. That's the link right there. Also, if you just go to our website, there's a bat house section, but it's also a bat garden section now too. So it's kind of all in one. You can check that out. I'm also happy, Alexis, I can send you the PDF if you want to share with people who are on the call tonight. Okay, so that's food. Yeah. And then you also want to think about roosting habitat too. So unlike pollinator gardens, we also want to think about trees for bat gardens, more woody stuff. And that's because trees not only provide roosting habitat, but some trees, a lot of trees have flowers. They're usually small, you don't think about them, but trees leave their flowers open all night. And so they're often host plants to a lot of different insect species, and the flowers attract a lot of insects too. So this book came out not that long ago. Doug Tallamy writes a lot about how you can kind of make your yard a wildlife habitat, and that's kind of his thing, which is really great. But he wrote about oaks and just the amazing ecosystem that exists within oak trees just by themselves. They're host plants for so many different insects. They house so many different species of wildlife. And for bats, oak trees are just fantastic because it's roosting habitat and it provides food as well. So it's really a win-win. And then I just wanted to show you guys. So this is a red bat curled up in a tree. My husband is a biologist and he was out in the preserve and they stumbled upon this bat just randomly. It was kind of about maybe as tall as his head. But yeah, they just happened to look up at the right time and find one. And that's just how random it is. Like they're just not that commonly seen. So, they really just try to blend in during the day and they don't want to be bothered. And then I did want to mention too, if you have palm trees, I think, people may have palm trees there. I'm not sure. I think there's at least one species of native palm to that area. But, a lot of times people will cut the palm fronds. They'll cut this part and just cut them off. And that's actually great bat habitat for certain species of bats. So if you can leave your palm trees shaggy, that's fantastic for bats. If it doesn't bother you, that's great. And then other things to think about too, bats love dead trees. Certain species of bats love to roost in dead trees. Dead trees attract a lot of insects too. So if you can leave dead trees up and it's not like a safety hazard, that's fantastic to do. And then this idea of vertical layers. So even if you have a really small space and you're not quite sure what to do with it, if you just plant things at different layers of the canopy, you'll create more ecological niches for different insects. And then that creates more food for bats. So you can really do a lot with a small space. You can really maximize that space as a bat habitat, which is cool. And you can also do this in a container garden too. If you have just a balcony, there's a lot of different plants you can plant that will attract insects and support insect populations. And you get butterflies too. So that's good. And then I always like to talk about bat houses because I know a lot of people either have a bat house or maybe think about getting one. We've sort of pivoted away from recommending bat houses because they don't have a ton of conservation value. Usually we kind of just like to promote native plants and kind of that aspect of bats because, native plants support so many different species of wildlife, but they support bat food, which is great. Sometimes you'll have a bat house and you'll do everything right. You'll do all our recommendations, you'll put it up and it just won't get occupied. So it can be kind of frustrating. But, if that's something you want to do, you have a good chance of getting bats in your bat house there because you have Mexican freetails and they love bat houses. So you could get bats. I don't know. But you just want to make sure you buy a good bat house. There's a lot of bad bat houses out there. We have a whole bat house section on our website that I highly recommend. Main things to think about, you want to avoid screen or mesh on the inside. We really don't. We used to recommend this and we don't anymore because we found over time as the bat houses sort of get older and break down, the screen or mesh starts to fall off and then bats can actually get stuck. So you want to make sure you don't have that on there. Larger is better. We like to give bats a lot of options. One of the issues with bat houses is they tend to get really hot really fast. And so if you have larger chambered bat houses, the bats can kind of move around and find a spot that's kind of the right temperature for them. If someone tries to sell you an attractant like a pheromone spray for your bat house or guano or bat pee, there's all sorts of crazy things out there. People will try to sell you, that says it'll bring bats to your bat house. None of that works. It's all a scam. So don't buy any of that. And then you want to make sure you paint it the proper shade. And that is something you figure out on our website, based on where you are. I think you want it to be sort of a light brown color. If you're really far up north, you want to paint it darker so it'll absorb more heat. And then where I am down in Texas, you want it to be super light so it doesn't absorb a bunch of heat. You guys are sort of in the middle. So I think sort of a light brown, kind of medium brown color works, but I would definitely check that on our website for sure. And then you want to put it in the right place. And that's kind of a tough thing too. We always recommend it against a building, but you can put it on a post as well. Against a building is best just because it keeps the temperature the most regular. They need about 6 to 8 hours of sun a day. So you want to think about that, but you want to face it sort of southeast, so it doesn't get that really hot kind of western afternoon sun. And then keep them away from trees. Don't put them on trees. That's kind of a very common mistake we see. Bats don't like them on trees. I think they sense like predators are going to be more of an issue because, things can climb up trees and get right in there. So we say 20 to 30 feet from the nearest tree and then 12 to 20 feet from the ground because bats really, they drop down and swoop out. So they need that clearance to do that. And then if it's near water, that gives it a bigger chance of actually getting occupied. So that always helps. And then other things, and I'll talk more about water in a second, but these are just sort of other recommendations that we have. Keep your yard, your garden organic. That's great. It's good for everything. Keep your cat inside. I'll let bird people yell at you about keeping your cat inside during the day, but at night, it's, believe it or not, cats will try to eat bats. We actually have issues with cats in a couple of our caves in Jamaica. Randomly, there's all these feral cats around this cave, and we have all these videos of them grabbing the bats out of the air as they're flying out, and it's just wild to see. But cats, they're like tiny little killers, and they will go after anything. And I love cats, so I have cats. They would eat a bat if they could. But yeah, so you just want to keep your cat inside at night. It's better for the cat as well, honestly. And then if you can keep your yard dark, that's great. There's a lot of light pollution in our urban areas that impacts everything, but it can really mess with the bat's ability to echolocate if there's too much light. They're just getting so much feedback, they kind of get disoriented. So if your yard is dark, that'll kind of create like a really safe haven for the bats to kind of forage, and that's fantastic. And then people always ask me about water. It'd be nice if we could just put a bird bath out and have bats like perch and drink, but bats, because they got to be different, they drink on the wing. So they literally fly down like this guy here, open their mouth and scoop up water as they're kind of flying by. So they need about 7 to 10 feet of water to drink successfully. So if you have like a pond, that's great. They will drink out of pools sometimes. I've seen that happen. I don't think it's great for them, but it does happen. And then, some people do like a really long like wildlife trough or something like that, but providing water for bats is a little trickier. But it is something you can do. You just want to make sure you have a long enough water source and that it's clear of like vegetation and other obstructions. That's something to think about. And now you're all bat advocates. Yay. So this is kind of a really quick Bats 101 and kind of talking about bats. Hopefully you've learned something. You're excited about bats now. And yeah, thank you for listening. Of course, this is my email. Feel free to, reach out if you've got questions. And then that is our website, batcon.org. And there's a ton of information on there. Highly recommend. Lots of cute bat pictures too.
Thank you so much, Erin. I learned a lot from
Yay!
that. That was awesome. And we had some really great questions in the chat.
Okay.
I'm excited to learn some more. So Julie asked, since white nose syndrome has reached Texas, how is the huge Bracken Cave colony protected? Are there feeding stations placed nearby?
That is a great question. So interesting thing with that is Mexican free-tails do not hibernate, they migrate. So although they do have the fungus, it has not developed into the actual disease. So, they probably are not going to die from white nose because of the way that their life cycle is. They are in Bracken for the summer and then they migrate down to Mexico every year. So they have it and they carry it, which is the problem because there's 20 million of them. And, that just gives you a sense of how hard it is to sort of prevent the fungus from spreading. but they actually will not die from white nose syndrome. Just because of the nature of how they are. That's a really good question, though. Yeah, people are like, oh my God, are the bracken bats okay? And it's like, they're okay for now. They're okay.
Well, that's a relief in some sense.
Yeah.
Thank you. And Julie had another question. How can a mother Mexican free-tailed bat find her pup in such a huge colony? Is it by
Oh my
smell?
God. I love that question, Julie. You
Yeah.
get a gold star for tonight. Yeah, so it's kind of amazing. I think we used to think that, the mom bats would come back and just feed the first pup that they found. Kind of were just assuming that there was no way they could find their baby in the millions of bats that were all kind of on the roof of this cave. But what they found is the baby bats will do a call that is just specific to them, that their mom's here, and they'll help the moms kind of zero into an area, and then she finds them by smell. Exactly. Like, it's kind of, as a mom, I'm just like, oh God, that's beautiful. Or anyone. Yeah. So yeah, they kind of zero in with the call, and then they find them by smell, and they always go back to their baby every single time, and they won't nurse another baby. They only find theirs, which is kind of amazing.
Wow, that's incredible. I'm really curious personally about how they went about answering that question. Like, was it just observation?
Yeah, I think they were like tagging the bats and then tracking them like in the cave. I don't know, this is before my time at BCI, but yeah, I'm like, it's kind of amazing we figured that out. It's a very well studied population, I'll say. Like, that cave and that population of bats is very well studied.
That makes sense. Science is awesome. We had another question about bat predators. Do they have any, and what eats them?
Yeah, that's a great question too.
Thank you, Michelle, for that question.
Yeah, Michelle. So yeah, one of the things that's interesting about bracken is because it's such a large aggregation of bats, you kind of get to see some of this ecology stuff up close. So if you're at the cave and all the bats are coming out, you've got hawks and falcons that will swoop in and grab them out of the sky, which is just crazy to watch. And then there's skunks at the bottom of the cave that hang out and wait for bats that kind of like, especially, this is sad, sorry, when the babies first start flying, they're not very good at it, and if they fall on the ground like that, that's it. So there's skunks, there's foxes, there's not armadillos, there's snakes. Sometimes the snakes will actually hang down in front of the cave and grab them out of the air, which is impressive and terrifying. Yeah, so there's kind of all those things. And then in the tropics, there's definitely some other things too. There is a spider, a big orb weaver spider that is known as I forget what it's called. I don't know. It eats birds too, but it will definitely eat bats, which is kind of horrifying too. But they definitely have predators. I think a lot of birds of prey and things like that. They're sort of hard to catch, which is good. But I think there's definitely bat predators out there. Yes.
Oh, thank you. Skunks was a surprise for me.
Yeah, and they're so darn cute too, the little skunks. They're just so stinky, Oh man, yeah.
Wow, cool. Thank you for that question, Michelle, and for that awesome and surprising answer. This also the snakes hanging down from the cave.
There's a snake at Bracken. He's been there, I think, for a long time. He has like a name too. It's so funny. It's just like a wild place.
Wow. Does anybody else have any questions? Feel free to raise your hand or unmute or type it in the chat. Okay, yes. Let's see. So Richard says, I live up in New England in Rhode Island.
Oh.
The housing community in which I live was built in the early 1950s. My neighborhood is big on using numerous chemicals to keep lawns green and bugs away. Can you make any suggestions on how to help the bat population with these issues?
Oh, that's so hard. People are really attached to spraying for mosquitoes, but the problem with the mosquito spray is there isn't just like one thing that just kills mosquitoes. So it kills all the good bugs too. And, I think that is, yeah. So, if you're spraying, you're killing a lot of bugs. So that's not great for the bats. I mean, I think it's kind of takes a long time to convince people otherwise. And, one of the things is if you have native plants in your yard, and you have more native plants than grass, hopefully over a certain amount of time, and you have all the good bugs too. So the things that are going to eat them, the spiders and, the wasps and the other things that are actually going to eat the mosquitoes as well. so it's sort of one of those things that has to really build back up over time, starting with sort of, trying to kind of like get rid of lawns because they don't have a lot of value. They have no conservation value, but people love lawns. And I know it's hard, and it's just like one of those things that's sort of a sea change that's happening, I think, slowly in the United States. But, there's a lot of communities that still spray for mosquitoes, and that's just really tough. So, I mean, I think, Richard, just talking to them about kind of, some of the issues related to kind of that chemicals being in the system, and kind of just understanding that the way insects work and why there's so many mosquitoes is because there's not a lot of mosquito predators around, including bats. And like having those chemicals is gonna, the bats are not gonna eat those mosquitoes, or not gonna be around even. So, I think adding bat habitat, starting with native plants and kind of going from there. And I don't know, I mean, I think we've had, like, my yard is a lot of native plants. Sometimes it looks crazy, sometimes it looks amazing. And I just talk a lot to my neighbors about what I'm doing and why. And I do think, like, over the years, I've had people like, I've dug stuff up and given it to people. And then I tell them like, oh, there's a native plant sale going on, wherever in Austin, like, and just kind of like building that interest and figuring out like where to access that stuff. And you can just be an advocate for that, I think. And I think your voice means a lot. So I don't know if that helps. It's a hard one, for sure.
Thank you, Erin. Yeah, it's always hard when
definitely
it's other humans who have to help inspire to kind of make those.
It's like almost like a drop in the bucket that hopefully keeps rippling out. I don't know.
Yes, but yes, your voice is important, Richard. Julie wants to know, is climate change affecting the size and health of the Bracken Cave and Austin Bridge colonies?
Oh, that's a good question. That's one that's hard to answer. I would say yes. I know for sure. So the colony at the bridge, it's not a natural habitat. Obviously, it's a man-made habitat. We have had 2 pretty crazy freezes here in the last 2 years, and the one in 2021 was really bad. It was like 0 degrees here for several days, which just never happens. And unfortunately, a lot of bats that were under bridges did not make it. They just froze to death because the bridge was just not that good of an insulating habitat, and they've just, most of the bats, okay, so I know I said they migrate, right? So they're not supposed to be there. But what we found actually is that bats from farther north in the country actually come to Austin during the winter, and they overwinter here. So they're sort of like a leapfrogging. So our bats go down to Mexico, other bats come farther north. So there's always bats at the bridge, actually, which is that's changed too. That wasn't always the case, I think. So because there's bats there, because our winters have been pretty mild or milder, when we do have sort of these extremes of weather where it's so cold, there was like thousands of bats just under these bridges that were just dead. And Austin Bat Refuge, which is our bat rehabber here, I think in 4 days they rescued 1,000 bats, which is just insane because it's just 2 people. It's just a husband and wife. They're the most lovely people in the world, and they love bats so much. And I don't think they slept for like 4 days. They were just taking in bats and trying to help them. A lot of them were just cold shocked. Some of them had like nerve damage on their wings from the freeze. So I mean, it was just devastating to see. And I think weather extremes in general can cause a lot of issues. Now, the bats at Bracken were totally fine during the freeze, and that's because it's a natural habitat. It's got 80 feet of guano in there, which is insane to think about, but all that guano is breaking down, and it makes the cave really warm. So the cave is a much more suitable habitat for the bats. So yeah, I mean, that's just one example, but I think, we've noticed at Bracken too, we've had a lot of droughts. And, I think with the droughts, it's harder for the bats to find food. So they come out earlier, in the summer when it's so hot, they come out earlier, they fly farther. It's just kind of more work for them to do to raise their babies, to have their babies be successful. So, I think that is definitely impacting the colony. It's really hard with that many bats to kind of see, that impact and kind of figure that out. But it's definitely something we're keeping an eye on for sure. But yeah, it's a great question.
Thank you for that question, Julie. Because that climate change is something that its impacts are far-reaching.
Yeah, definitely.
So Dominic and Isabel have a fun question. They want to know if any out of the 1,400 species of bats, it's 1,400, right?
Yeah,
Um,
over. It's
over
like
1400.
56, I think. I don't know. I forget the exact number, but yes.
Oh, Julie says
Oh, 4062. There you go.
1462.
Okay. Yeah, that number, we just like put that out on our social media. I should know it. Thank you, Julie. I appreciate you.
From all of those different species, are there any that go out in the day or out in the sun?
That's a great question. So actually a lot of fruit bats in, Australia and Asia, like you'll see them in the day just chilling in trees, and they're big. So they'll just be in parks or neighborhoods in the trees. I think, they're sleeping. They're not usually hunting, but like they're there and you can see them. And if you think about it, like a lot of the bats, like the tree roosting bats that we have here are out during the day too. They're just kind of hunkered down and asleep. So it's kind of interesting, like, the ones that, roost in structures, they're obviously not going to be out during the day, but there's a lot that just roost in trees and vegetation, and they're out there. They're just kind of like, don't bother me right now, I'm asleep. So yeah, that's a great question.
Yes, thank you for that question. Julie wants to know, do the farmers and ranchers near Bracken Cave appreciate the bats?
Definitely. Yeah, I would say absolutely. There is a ton of agricultural land kind of southeast of the cave, and that's generally where the bats go when they come out. Because you're like, where do 20 million bats find food? They all go there, and it's cotton and corn crops, and all the cotton, it's like I can't remember the pest name now. There's the corn earworm, which becomes a moth, and then one of the cotton pests too, that becomes like they eat the beetles and the moths. So, they're doing them a huge service by going to their fields every single night in the summer and eating all those pests. So, I think people that work, with crops and they understand kind of the value of the bats for sure. So yeah, they have a lot of friends in strange places. I would say the Bracken bats, they're very loved in Texas generally.
That's awesome. Going back to the last one about bats in the day, Kimberly says their parents immigrated from Thailand, and they'd occasionally see bats growing up during the daytime.
Very cool.
That's really cool.
Oh, that's awesome.
So we've got a couple minutes left. If anybody has any last minute questions about bats. I have a question.
Yeah, go for it.
Do you have a favorite bat, Erin?
Yes, it's this one right here on the screen. So this is a pallid bat. They are awesome. They eat a lot of different things, but they also eat scorpions and those giant horrifying centipedes with like the red heads. So, and the cool thing about them is they've because they're eating scorpions don't fly, right? So how the heck do you catch a scorpion if you're a bat? What they do is they're called like whispering bats. So, if the scorpion hears them coming, like echolocating, it'll run. So they actually land on the ground, like near it, and then they kind of slowly like walk, which it's really weird to see a bat walk. There's actually a video from, I think, PBS called like the whispering bat, and it's basically a pallid bat like stalking and eating a scorpion. It's like the coolest thing. But they actually will like walk over the scorpion and kind of wait, and then once the scorpion moves again, they pounce on it just like a cat basically and just grab it and gobble it up. It's really cool. Pallid bats are amazing. They have like, the scorpion stings don't bother them, which is amazing too. So like when they're getting eaten, they're often getting stung, while they're chewing, and like the stings don't bother them. And they have a lot of like really cool regeneration properties within their wings. So like, just medically, they're really cool. And then they also like sometimes I think will pollinate. We're not really sure, but they're sort of like on the edge. They definitely eat a lot of bugs, but we think they might eat nectar too. So they just like defy classification. But yeah, I love pallid bats.
That is so fascinating about
They're awesome.
stalking the scorpions on the ground.
It's a great, I'll send you the link after this if you want to share. It's like such a fun video.
Awesome. And I will send a collection of links.
All the things.
Yes, all the things. Actually on Tuesday, because tomorrow's my day off.
Yay! Yay for a day off.
Yay for days off. Julianne says there's a live event later from back in cave to watch the bats fly out. Is that like online, like a live stream?
I think it's for International Bat Day or whatever tomorrow. I think it's tomorrow. Yeah, they're gonna.
Yes, it is. Hi, yes, it is tomorrow. Sorry, I'm in England. I'm in London, so it's currently 3 a.m. here, which is why I got my days confused. Yes, live stream, April the 17th, 7:30 CDT time.
Yes, thank you for
watch all the bats fly out.
Yes, thank you for reminding me. I forgot about that. Yeah, we finally got Wi-Fi at the cave, so I think our live stream is like going pretty well, and you should all check it out. That's super cool. Thank you, Julianne. I appreciate you being here at 3 a.m. in London. Oh my gosh.
Agreed.
I will say the UK, like British people love bats. There's like a whole there's a group over there called Bat Conservation Trust, and that's kind of the BCI of the UK, but they have all these like bat groups, like these people started bat groups in kind of each little, I guess, town. I don't know what you call like Julianne, like
we have them in each county. So like I live just outside London, so I'm in like the Sussex one and the Surrey one.
Yes, and
but I'm also in ones all around the country as well. So we kind of just migrate and join them all.
That's so cool. I'm just like so impressed by how much the people in the UK like love bats. It blows me away. It's the coolest thing.
That is awesome. Wow.
Cool.
So it is 7 o'clock. And I do want to respect people's time. I did see a couple more questions in the chat, but we can answer in a follow-up email if we didn't get to your question. But thank you for the really thoughtful questions, everybody. And thank you so much, Erin, for such an amazing and engaging webinar. I learned so much about bats, and I hope you all did too.
Thank you so much. You guys had great questions. Very impressive.
I hope you all have a great rest of your Sunday or a great Monday in England. And I will be sending a follow-up email with all of these links and maybe the slides too.
Yeah, I'm happy to share. Sure.
Great. Yeah, I'll send those too. And we'll answer any last questions we didn't get to. Thank you so much, Erin. Thank you again to Post for co-hosting this. And yeah, I'm Alexis. I'm from Saved by Nature. We're so happy to partner with Bat Conservation International. So thank you.
We love Saved by Nature. You guys are amazing and you do amazing work.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
All right, bye.
Thank you. Bye.